What would you say to a yoga teacher, yoga studio owner who wants to keep the integrity of yoga in the West? Great. There's a lot to be said. The first piece is to remember that yoga means union, which means there isn't a right style of yoga and a wrong style of yoga. When we are yoga studio owners, well, that's a business. I've got rent to pay. I've got electricity bills to pay. Assuming I've got a bathroom, I've got water bills to pay. That's very real stuff. And so what ends up happening is we end up in our well-intentioned goal of bringing in people. We end up having to sell something. And I have to sell something that makes what I do different from what the guy down the street is doing. Otherwise, why will people come to my studio? And the dilemma with how most of that works is it draws lines and borders. Well, this style of yoga is better than that style of yoga because of this and that. This is the best. This is the only one. This is the real one. So while there's, of course, nothing wrong with using marketing and whatever you need to do to attract people, to be a magnet, to be the light that draws people to you, it's important to not use, that's okay, no problem, to not use the temptation of distinctions and differences and separations, that in the service of union, we don't want to be drawing distinctions. That's piece one. Piece two is it's really important to realize that that union of which yoga speaks, at its core, is not just about, as we always say, our nose to our knees or our fingers to our toes. Deepest spiritual meaning. It's a union of the self to the divine. The Bhagavad Gita, my favorite topic, is 700 verses on yoga. It's a treatise on yoga. He doesn't teach one asana. In fact, the only time that asana is mentioned, it actually refers to that thing that you sit on rather than the posture that you're in. He gives a few lines about the asana. It should be not too thick, not too thin, not too hard, not too soft. And in fact, he then says very beautifully, after describing the asana, what it should be made of, now that you are established in asana, now that you are established here on my asana, you are ready to begin the practice of yoga. Which, should we ever have had any doubt about whether asana is yoga or not, that clarifies it. Once you are established in asana, you are ready to begin the practice of yoga. Clearly, they're two different things. Asana is an essential part, but it's not the fullness of yoga. And in that union, there's a lot that we are called upon to do. The 8 limbs of yoga that Patanjali gave. Well, asana is limb number 3, so let's go back to bricks for a moment. If I were building a house or a building, could you start on the 3rd floor? Could I build the 3rd floor first? Right, what would happen? Yeah, it would collapse. Without a foundation, nothing lasts. Well, the foundation of yoga, the limb 1 and 2, are what are called the yamas and the niyamas, which is how we live. Has nothing to do with your thighs or your hamstrings or your spine or your waist. It's things like non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-hoarding, integrity in my relationships, purity. I mean, there's 10 of them. So if we are teaching yoga or running a studio of yoga, it's not yoga if it doesn't have a foundation and a rooting and a grounding in the yamas and the niyamas. And that goes very deep because, for example, truthfulness is not, sadly, simply the opposite of lying. The simple fact that I haven't told you a lie does not necessarily mean I'm being truthful. Truth, capital T, truth, is who we are. Which means that we have to be rooted in the exploration of, the awareness of, the touching of, the awakening of who we are. But it also has to do with how we move through the world. So the very first one is ahimsa, non-violence. Well, again, that doesn't just mean if I refrain from walking into my yoga studio with a gun and killing everybody, I'm non-violent. There's violence in how we live. There's violence in how we eat. There's violence in how we shop. There's violence in what we buy. Every single time, my sole agenda is more, 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 cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. Well, that's violent. It's violent to women and children in sweatshops who are there because I need more, 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 cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. It's violent to the earth because the factories then that are cutting corners are dumping their waste into our soil, into our water, into our air. So there's a lot of real deep work that's exciting. And it's an opportunity not to feel overwhelmed, but it's an opportunity to realize, wow, yoga is what I do 24 hours a day, who I am 24 hours a day. In this studio of yoga, we give you not just that for your hamstrings and your thighs and your waist, but we give you that for you, so that when you walk out of here, you walk out of here a completely different way than you walked in. But the tree of yoga doesn't end on the 3rd floor either. It goes all the way up to 8. So it's also, just as it's important not to begin with asana, it's important not to end with asana. And I won't go through all the 8 limbs of yoga here, but the 8th limb is samadhi. That ecstatic bliss, union, oneness with the divine, which also means that as we're teaching, there has to be an awareness, an acknowledgement of the fact that ultimately that's where we're going. And okay, it's not that trikonasana is necessarily going to get you there today, right here, immediately. But it's about the awareness that getting your hand down on the floor in trikonasana is the means to an end when you are established in asana. You are ready to begin the practice of yoga. So it's not, I touched my toes, I'm done. It's, I am established in Uttanasana. Now I am ready to begin the practice of yoga. So if you can do that, even as an attempt, even as an intention, that intention will inform and impact and affect every decision you make. everything you teach, everyone you hire. And it'll be not only doing well, but doing good.